What makes for an authentic Western movie?
I've been thinking about that.
Hats and boots. The dialogue.
It's not your lucky day, stranger.
The shootouts. Well, Ken Mather's new book, Frontier Cowboys and the Great Divide, is the third in his BC Ranching Cowboy series. He says that if you were a cowboy in British Columbia in the early 1800s, you had a lot more horse under you.
The horse, as it developed in the prairies, was agile and small, whereas the Hudson's Bay Company had brought heavy horses into the Pacific Northwest in the 1830s and 40s, and they'd interbred with these Spanish horses, and a much heavier breed of horse had developed west of the Great Divide. Probably the finest horses in the early cattle industry in Alberta were referred to as the BX horses. And they came right out of the BX ranch here outside of Vernon. They were big and heavy and strong as an ox.
And the reason they needed to be bigger in BC was because the cattle were bigger.
The type of cattle that were coming up from Texas were longhorns, and they were lean and stringy. The type of cattle that were being raised in British Columbia were a cross with the British Shorthorns, and they were a stocky, beefy cattle that were twice as heavy as the longhorns, and of course twice as hard to handle from a horse. And so the British Columbia horses had to be brought to southern Alberta when the new breeds came in, because cow ponies couldn't rope them and hang on to them.
And when you put the Spanish influence together with the bigger horses, BC cowboys look different than their prairie colleagues. Be careful about calling them cowboys.
The term cowboy would not have been used to address those who drove cattle into British Columbia in the early days. Drovers, they would have called themselves. In fact, they'd have probably fought you if you called them a cowboy. The various earliest drovers to bring cattle into British Columbia had the very strong influence of the Mexican vaquero, to the point where the term vaquero was mispronounced buckaroo. And so what we see in British Columbia is an extension of the buckaroo. There was a unique type of cowboy west of the Rockies. He rode a bigger horse. He had all the Spanish gear like the tapaderos and the romal reins, and he dressed more like the Mexican cowboy than the ones you would have found on the other side of the Rockies.
And that's the kind of cowboy you'd have found on the O'Keefe Ranch. And Ken Mather should know, he's retiring from the curator's job he's held for 30 years.
You know, it was the first post office, the first general store, the stagecoach depot for the entire Okanagan Valley. And people don't realize that if we lose this part of our heritage, we lose a big part of who we were in the past. The church is kind of a symbol of O'Keefe Ranch. I mean, there was a time where we wanted to use that as a logo, but using a church as a logo was not exactly modern, I think. Yeah. So we shied away from it. But it certainly is the one building that people would recognize at O'Keefe Ranch.
How long has it been there?
1889, so it's been around for a long time. 3,000 plus school kids come through here in May and June alone. So over the course of the 30 years I've been here, that's, I think, 90,000 school kids. So the next generation has been sort of seeded into appreciating the things of heritage.
It's always been a struggle to get adequate budgets to maintain and operate the historic O'Keefe Ranch. The recent news the city of Vernon will be drastically reducing its financing has Mather worried.
Roberts on the Road is powered by the Centez Auto Group.